All right, Madame Glasser, to you first. Your reaction to the report by your colleague Jane Meyer about Pete. I keep saying that. I thought I shook it, but I didn't. Pete Hegseth. What does this say about how Donald Trump is picking people? I mean, it just keeps getting worse for this guy.
Yeah, Steph, I mean, you know, if you haven't read the piece by Jane in the New Yorker, I highly recommend it. It's so voluminous. This isn't just a report from a single disgruntled employee, as that statement that you quoted said. There's, you know, enormous amount of information in there spanning multiple jobs that Pete Hegseth had. The allegations are disturbing. They remind me in some ways of the conduct that sank John Towers' nomination to be Secretary of Defense back in the first George H.W. Bush presidency. But, you know, it goes beyond not only the allegations of potential alcohol abuse in the workplace, but, you know, real questions about his ability to manage even two relatively small veterans organizations to step into the Pentagon job, the largest, most powerful military bureaucracy in the world. This does not suggest he has the qualifications to do so. And more importantly, it immediately raises the questions, what is going on with the Trump administration to be in terms of vetting these candidates? What did Donald Trump know, if anything, about these allegations, in addition to the allegations of alleged sexual assault that have previously been disclosed about this nominee? You've got to wonder, isn't this exactly why we have background checks and vetting of nominees for high office in the first place?
Andrew, Hegseth met with Senator Tommy Tuberville today, also sort of a Donald Trump super fan. What are Senate Republicans saying tonight about Hegseth?
Well, they're still giving Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt here, and by extension, Pete Hegseth. We're not seeing, like we saw with the Matt Gaetz nomination, for example, that behind-the-scenes maneuvering by Republican senators trying to sort of preemptively kill this nomination. Now, I think that's a reflection of the fact that Senate Republicans still do not want to do anything at this point to upset Donald Trump. But we are seeing them stand by the FBI background check process, which is coming really under assault by the Trump transition team, which is trying to prevent the FBI from carrying out these background checks. Just earlier tonight, Republicans and Democrats, senators were back in town for the first time since the Thanksgiving break. And I asked Republicans about this, and they were pretty much uniform in saying that, yes, it should be the FBI that carries out these background checks. And, you know, the Trump team is trying to prevent that from happening right now. But even the incoming Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, told me earlier this evening that the FBI background checks are basically the gold standard. And so I think that's a way that Republicans are trying to stay cautious, keep their powder dry on all of these nominations, including Kash Patel, by the way, and really lean on the idea that more information could come out as these background checks hopefully progress forward.
Neil, just put a Department of Justice hat on for us for a second. Let's just say FBI background checks are bypassed. They don't happen, right? Donald Trump would love for that to be the case. If it doesn't happen, it's not like our foreign adversaries aren't digging up every ounce of dirt there are on these people who could end up with some of the most important jobs in our government.
That's exactly right. I mean, I went through two really extensive background checks where they overturned they looked into every nook and cranny of my life. And that's the way the Justice Department works, and all senior executive branch positions. And it has to be that way, not just because you're trying to assess trustworthiness, Steph, but what you're getting at, which is likelihood of blackmail. If someone's done something that's embarrassing and a foreign adversary or, you know, some other malicious actor finds out about it, you're leaving that person vulnerable to all sorts of blackmail attempts. And so that's the rationale for it. It seems to me absolutely unforgivable that Trump's disposing with that. I just can't imagine something that's, you know, more corrosive to our national security.
I guess we just learned that Neil Katyal did not go to a foam party in Cancun in 1995. All right, Susan, let's talk about Kash Patel. Before we get into him, I want to share a bit of what my colleague Ken Dilanian explained earlier today about the importance of being the FBI director, what this job entails. Watch this.
The FBI director wields incredible power in the United States. And for anyone who doesn't believe that, go read a biography of J. Edgar Hoover. Now, we don't live in the Hoover days anymore, but the FBI still, they have people who can break into your home and plant a bug and you'll never know about it. And they can get secret warrants, national security warrants to do that, and no one will ever find out. They can obtain the records of news media phone calls and we'll never hear about it, assuming a Justice Department set of guidelines on that is overturned. So this is an incredibly powerful job.
Okay, Susan, we know how loyal Kash Patel is to Donald Trump. We know what he has said in the past. But is this man qualified to run the FBI?
Look, Steph, remember that the FBI has a 10-year term precisely to avoid the politicization by any particular administration. This is a response to the excesses of the J. Edgar Hoover era. It is a response to the concerns about the enormous power, potential power that the FBI could wield in our society. To hand it over to a highly politicized lieutenant of Donald Trump, who has already spoken openly and explicitly about his plans to abuse the powers of these office to carry out political revenge on behalf of Donald Trump. He published a list. I counted 60 names on it. Those are just of current and former U.S. government officials he says are part of a deep state that he would want to go after on Trump's behalf. This is really not only challenging the very principles behind the FBI, but basically a direct attack on the independence of the institution and a kind of politicization of the institution that we have worked so hard to move away from. So I think it's in some ways one of the most direct frontal assaults that Trump has so far mounted on the government. It speaks to his agenda of revenge as not just being empty words on the campaign trail.
Andrew, again, this is a Senate-confirmed position. What are senators saying about this guy?
Look, Republicans so far, as I mentioned before, are keeping their powder dry. I thought it was very curious earlier when I asked Senator Thom Tillis, a Republican of North Carolina, member of the Judiciary Committee, which is going to consider this nomination, about Kash Patel's past statements and, for example, saying that he wants to actively carry out retribution against Donald Trump's political enemies. And Senator Tillis responded and said, I just don't believe he's going to do that. And then the obvious response is, of course, well, he's said he's going to do that, right? So Senator Tillis and other Republicans and Democrats on that committee will have a chance, if it gets to that point of a confirmation hearing, to question him on all of this. But again, right now, Senate Republicans are starting from a position of deference to Donald Trump, even though, it was referenced that Christopher Wray, of course, is in the middle of his 10-year term. Christopher Wray was first appointed by Donald Trump in 2017 after he fired James Comey, of course. And so, Republicans are not necessarily saying that Christopher Wray has done anything wrong or that they have any issue with his tenure as FBI director, but they are being deferential to Donald Trump's ability, in their view, his right, as they see it, to have an FBI director who is more in line with his vision.
All right, Neil, new topic. Let's talk about the Hunter Biden pardon. First, as somebody who worked at the DOJ, how do you see all of this?
Well, Steph, I'm not a fan of using pardons in this way, but it is an understandable act of a father toward his sole surviving son. These crimes that Hunter Biden was charged with were not ones that result in jail time typically. The charges relate to a very difficult time in Hunter's life, one about addiction and the like. And most importantly, Hunter accepted responsibility. He's been sober for 5 years. His statement yesterday says, look, I've turned my life around. I want to dedicate my life toward better things. And that's what pardons are at their heart. They're all about. They're acts of mercy. And it's important to point out, Donald Trump himself said last month that he would consider pardoning Hunter. So he's now crowing about the sky falling, but it's a very different tune than what he himself said last month. Now, there's a lot of Republican critics today who are saying, this pardon's wrong and so on. And I don't want to hear from those folks when they were nowhere in 2020 with the Trump pardons. I mean, remember Trump pardoned Steve Bannon, who defrauded many millions of dollars, was convicted of that. He pardoned Republican Congressman Rick Renzi for extortion and bribery. He pardoned Shalom Weiss, who had an 835-year sentence for white-collar fraud. He pardoned Elliot Brody, the former RNC finance chair, one of Trump's top fundraisers, who was convicted for foreign lobbying law violations. He pardoned Duke Cunningham, another Republican member of Congress. He commuted his fixer, Roger Stone, who was convicted of lying to Congress. And we could go on and on. So now the Democrats, some of them are saying, well, this sets a bad precedent. Trump is now going to be able to pardon the January 6th people or things like that. And for those folks, I have the question, when has Donald Trump ever relied on a prior norm to constrain him? The precedents are already there for Trump. If he wants to pardon the folks, the January 6 folks, he could just look back to what he did in 2020 and say, this is just more of the same. So where I come down on this stuff is, look, we can make the argument, and I think it's a good debate to have, is this pardon intrinsically wrong? Are we rewarding people based on family connections or something like that? That's a good debate to have. But the debate we shouldn't have is, oh, this is now going to enable Donald Trump. Donald Trump enables Donald Trump.